Hello friends, my name is Nirav Kaku and I'll be presenting the Delphi DataSnap server with HTML5 Builder. And what we are basically going to do is we'll be basically creating a Delphi DataSnap REST server, and we'll have a MySQL database at the back. After that, we are going to be creating an HTML5 Builder application, and we'll be invoking a method on the Delphi REST server. The method will be fetching data from the MySQL server, and the data will be encoded in JSON, and it will be sent to the client, and the JSON data will then be encoded in an HTML grid. So let's start coding. Snap REST application, go to File, New, Others, choose Delphi DataSnap server and choose DataSnap REST application. You're going to keep it a standalone VCL application, no changes there. Port 8080 is fine. You can just test the port. It succeeded. Great. Keep the server methods and web files on. We'll need to basically we need them to basically test our application functions. An important thing here is to actually use the data module simply because we will need a container for the SQL connection to connect to MySQL database. So we're going to use that. And you can actually very quickly change this to, let's say, if I want to make it my computer, D drive. I'm going to make a new folder in D drive called CodeRage, and in CodeRage I'm going to put my application. There you go. So it's going to open up CodeRage. There you go. Fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically quickly first save all the things. So I'm just going to keep the same default names, don't change anything there, and very quickly run the server to see if it's working fine. Yep, and it's going to have to allow access, and so let's open the browser first and see if everything is working fine. Set of functions, so method, reverse string, execute, and there you go. So our server is working fine. Now that our server is working fine, it's time to get back to our application and open up the server methods unit. Notice that it's a T-data module because we've chosen that, and make a connection to the MySQL database. Let's use the DBX drivers. Use MySQL. Take the params. My server is running locally, so it's localhost. This is already a database that I've created for demo, and we are going to put root as a password, and that's it. I'm going to turn the login prompt off, connect it true, and there we go. So now we know that our server is now connected to MySQL database. So now that we have a MySQL connection live in our server, the next thing we want to do is create a method for for the client application to call. For that, we're going to go to the methods unit and very quickly create a method called get data. And let's say this get data takes an SQL string. Let's say first it takes a table name, which is a string, and SQL, that's also a string, and it returns a JSON array, right? And as you can see, we're getting an error here simply because we haven't used the unit. So let's quickly use the units. JSON, and you can see DTS JSON. This is the unit that you're going to use to get this thing. And once we declare this method, let's very quickly implement this method. Now you can see that the function accepts two parameters, both time string, and it returns the JSON array. Now, because this is an SQL, we will need a query, so we just create a SQL query to execute the SQL this function receives. And since we're creating it dynamically, we need to write the create statement self and query.free, so just so that we don't forget. And after that, we're going to do query is equal to, so query.sql.text is equal to the SQL that the function has got, and query.sql connection is equal to the connection that we had put in our data module, and query.open. Now, so once we have received the SQL and we get an open query, it's now time to actually figure out how we are going to be encoding this data in our response. So the first thing that I want to do is, in my mind, be clear how we are going to be encoding. So since the method returns a JSON array, the first thing I know is that it's going to be an array, and in that array I am going to be supplying two objects, and the first object is going to have the key is going to have key as the table name, which is going to be this, and the value of that key will be the names of the field of the table. So let's say this would be field 1 name, field 2 name, so on and so forth. And we're going to close this array. The second object will actually contain the data, and the key would be data, and the data is basically going to be an array of rows. So this is the array of rows, and each row is going to be an array of fields, and the value of the fields will be inside the last array. So row 1 field 1 value, row 1 field 2 value, so on and so forth. And this will be the second row, which will be row 2 field 1 value, row 2 field 2 value, so on and so forth. Once again, this is just a sample of how we want to encode. We are going to actually start encoding the data in this format now. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to encode this object, which is basically the fields information. So let's create an object called fields object, and that is JSON object, and this is going to be the end. Fields object is equal to the JSON object dot create, right? And let's also create a field name array. So field name array is again a T JSON array, and field name array is equal to T JSON array dot create. And now what we're going to do is we're going to enumerate all the field names one by one. So for I is equal to 0 to query dot field count minus 1 to field name array dot add, and in that we will do query dot fields I dot field name. And now we've got all the field names in the JSON array here. And finally, we are going to take the fields object dot add pair, and the first thing we're going to add is the table name that we received. And next, what we're going to do is add the fields array. So this should give us this in the end. So just to test, let's result the JSON array dot create and add the first element, and which is basically fields object void, and save all of this. Quickly run this. So we're going to open the browser. Server functions, and you should see our function here. Let's say table name is categories, and we're going to select stuff in categories and execute. And there you go. You can see it returns an array, and the first object of the array is the table name that we've supplied, and the value of that object is all the fields that that table has. So far so good, it works fine. You can close this. The next thing you want to do is similarly create the object for the data. So let's say we're going to have the data object, which is the JSON object, and we're going to have data rows, which is the JSON array, and each data row is going to have fields, so you have the JSON array for the fields. More appropriate group, right? And now the next thing you want to do is get rid of this. Let's first create a data object, which is going to be a main object, the JSON object.create. Let's create data rows, which is going to be an array of rows. And finally, once you've created an array of rows, let's enumerate through all the rows. So query dot first, while not query dot end of file, again end, query dot next. Oops. So now for each row we want to do the value, so we're going to use the same code here again, and 0 to field count, and then this time, so the next thing we're going to do is create every row for the data rows array. So row fields equal to the JSON array dot create, and we're going to use this and add string. Let's just put it as string, and as soon as the row is created, we would want to add it to our main data rows object array, main data rows array. So we can do add and add row fields to it. And once it finishes, what we want to do is we want to add the entire data rows to the data object data and the data rows. And finally, let's see the result. Okay, so array.create, open up and set the fields object and data object. And quickly, let's see what the function returns to us. And the functions get data, execute, and there you go. So as you can see, it returns an array. The first object is the field's information. The second object is data, and the value is an array, and each element of the array is again an array of field values. So now that our application DataSnap server application works perfectly, it's time to move on to HTML Builder 5 and create a client application to invoke this method and get this response. Okay friends, so let's get started by coding in HTML5 Builder. First thing we'll do is create a new project. You click on new, HTML Builder 5 projects, server web application, and it's going to create a new unit for us. So let's first very quickly save this project in our directory called CodeRage, and let's save this as main.php. And of course, it's going to ask me for the project name, so I'm just going to say TS client, and that's about it. Very quickly, let's run this application, and as you can see, it will run an application. Sorry, I clicked it twice, but you can see it produces a empty page, so the application runs well without giving any errors. So the first thing that we want to do is create a button here, the event, and create two edit boxes, or as you'd call them in Delphi, and give it a label saying caption, yeah, there you go. So we call this table name, and we put another label here and call it SQL. Let's rename this button, call it fetch data, and name as button fetch data. I also should name this to PDT SQL, and let's do PDT table name. Perfect. So we've got our components named. Quickly save it, run it once again just to see, and you can see the components have come up perfectly. So the next thing we want to do is add DataSnap, a connection to basically our DataSnap server. First thing we do is make sure that our server is running, and start the server. Then you go to home, new, other files, DataSnap REST client module, double click that, and fill in the information of the DataSnap server that we created. So local host what was 8080, which was default. Click OK, and if everything goes well, then HTML5 Builder creates two new units for you. One is the class unit, and one is the client module unit. You can see very quickly. Let's save this information, save these units, and we'll just save them as default, make no changes there. So once we have our client module unit and client class unit done, the next thing you want to do is actually add some code to the main page. And the first thing you want to do is you want to use the unit that the module unit that HTML5 has just created. So you click here, click OK. You can see it puts up the require once add line, and then you go here and just like Delphi, you double click and it creates a method automatically. And in this, you want to basically use the class that has already been declared here. So you go to the client module unit, and all you have to do is just redeclare it in your method. And from this point onwards, you'll be able to use the class. So you can do this client module, and you can see several method clients. And here's our method get data, which accepts two parameters, string and table name, which is what we had put in our server, if we remember. There you go. There it is. And here you want to put the two parameters as one is the table name text, and the second one is SQL text. So basically it will take text of these two components and will pass as a parameter to this function. And since we are expecting a JSON array, you may want to declare a new variable called result. You declare that null, and result is equal to the function result. And now very quickly let us test if our result is coming as expected by using the where dump function. Let's save this and run this application. So let's start the server, and here you can see I'm going to put categories, select, fetch data, and it should give us the JSON array perfectly. There you go. So let's go ahead and create a function that will convert the result into an HTML grid. First thing we need to do is, of course, declare the function. So let's call it function JSON array to HTML grid, and it takes two variables, which one is the table name and the second one is the actual result that the get data returns. And let's first create the field names. So and fields will be the JSON array that, and since our field name is the first object and the name we had given as the table name, so we're going to put that. And now this value, this variable will now contain an array of field names. So we can quickly also make, say, another variable called HTML grid, which is what we are going to be returning. The HTML grid is equal to when we start our table. So table and row, and now we need to enumerate all the fields. So I'm going to use a standard equal to 0, $I less than count of dollar fields, $I plus plus, and in this we are going to now create the title. So HTML grid is equal to HTML grid, then add cell td, and then add fields name, and then close the cell. And finally, we are going to close this table. There we go. And return this as the function value. Now, in my main page, I've put one label tree, which is where I want to display the table that I'm creating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to say label 3 caption equal to this JSON array, and I'm going to give the first parameter as the table name and the second parameter as result that we received. And I'll come here and let's just also make this border equal to 1 so we can see the borders. Let's quickly test this application and see if it works. And I'm going to put categories, select, fetch data, and you can see that it has created a table of all the field names that was in the first object of our result. Okay, so the rest of the function is basically to add all the data, and for that what we're going to do is we're going to add rows as a variable, and then rows and row values as another variable. And what we're going to do is we are going to first get all the rows in an array, and that's the second element of our result. And we are going to write a for loop again to go through all the rows. I equal to 0, I less than count rows, I plus plus, so we're going to loop. And what we also want to do is for each row we have to create an HTML tag. So we're going to do create dot tr, and once we do that we have to loop through all the columns. So let's take this again, $j is equal to 0. Before that, let's take the first element and assign it to row values. Row values is equal to $rows, $I, and now j is less than count of row values. J plus plus, and let's look through all the fields. So for each field we have to add a TD tag TD, and after which we add the value. So of the fields, row values, $j, and we close the TD tag. Oops. And after which we close the row tag. And finally, we close the table tag. And of course, we need to check this out. I think I've forgotten something here. Okay, so very quickly, let's see if this application works. Let's run it. Upload post, loading up, categories, and fetch data, and there you go. Now you can see that it is returned the field names, and after that, under each field name, it has returned its value. So this function basically, basically just converted a JSON array to an HTML grid, which is returned by our DataSnap server. Of course, you can make small changes here again, like while you're doing row, you can actually make it bold, or add some CSS changes to it. Now, quickly, you can see that the field values have come in bold. So that's it.
I mean, what I like about your HTML5 Builder code is it's just very clear to see what's going on. You know, very clean and clear to see, as opposed to, I think other people might, and somebody was asking a question about, shouldn't there be a component that you drag and drop, as we were talking earlier? But yes, of course. But even that component underneath the covers would be probably wrapping this HTML5 code and PHP code anyway.
Absolutely.
Because that's what the RCPL components, the RPCL components are doing in HTML5 Builder and RAD PHP before it. Is that it, in many cases, the components are simply wrapping some JavaScript and HTML code and maybe some AJAX code that's calling back to an HTML5 Builder server. But again, using REST, there's all sorts of clients that you can create. You can have Delphi C++ Builder clients. You can have Objective-C clients, C# clients, and hey, you can have HTML5 and JavaScript clients. It's REST and JSON, which are industry standards. So, and again, I want to remind everybody that Nirav is going to put the sample code on the Indug site and go to his blog, which is on the screen, indug.co.in/blog for the India Delphi user group, and you'll find a link once he uploads the sample code. You'll find a link to that sample code on the blog.
And if you follow me on Twitter, I'll put it up on Twitter too. So you don't have to really go to the website or something. It'll just be ready for download.
Yep. Let's see. Lewis is saying that was great and seemed pretty straightforward. Is it possible then to allow a mobile app to make changes and return the edits back to a database mobile app, or I guess client web app? Is it possible to make changes and return the edits? Well, in your case, you were just displaying a grid, right, or an HTML.
Right. Right. But of course, it is definitely possible to send back changes to the DataSnap server by passing parameters to the functions. But of course, this example just is a one-way process of displaying the grid. But of course, if I had for example, you can say that if you saw that I had two edit boxes on the client side, right, which one was the table name and one was the SQL query, and the SQL query and the table name actually got to the DataSnap server side for the server to understand, which query to execute and how the information should be sent back. So definitely, it's possible to send information back to the DataSnap server, change it, and of course send it back to the DataSnap server.
And Pavel Glowacki is mentioning here, as far as he knows, you actually don't need to free it. That ultimately DataSnap will free up the instance of the connection from the client to the server. But for me, I like to free things up in code. So
same here.
Rick is asking you, is there anything you could have used in Delphi to reduce the amount of code you needed to type on the, I guess, on the HTML5 Builder side?
Well, yes, actually, yes, I could have simply made the grid in Delphi and, sent the grid as a string and, and displayed it. But the idea was to actually use JSON as a data encoding standard, because that's the world standard, right? So and to basically show how that object could how the data in that object could be used in multiple ways. And I understand Rick's concern, because the code is a lot on PHP side, because of course I'm building the entire HTML grid myself. But once you have the JSON packet on the client side, and if you use the available PHP components, the code is going to be drastically reduced based on the components that you use on the client side.
Yep, and I agree with you. You may have a different kind of client that's not a browser or a mobile client that would want to take a JSON packet versus a string that you have to pull apart with all the TRs and the tables and closed tables, and where you just want to send the JSON packet and have a parser over there. There's lots of parsers for JSON for all different languages. Maybe you have a Python client,
absolutely,
right? A Python client, or who knows what the client's built in. So
that's a fantastic point. David, that you made a fantastic point, right? Because you can have multiple clients that just accept JSON data, right? And instead of just sending a string, now you can use the JSON packet. Now you can use the same JSON packet to make a grid. You can use the same JSON packet to display data in different components, and of course you would not need to change anything on the server side at all.
And then George was asking, when we're sending, simple data types like, well, ultimately it's all strings, but integers and text and so on. What do you do with JSON when you want to send binary data like pictures or or some some other kind of data stream?
Well, to be honest, I have not really tried tried sending binary data over because I was mostly playing with primary data. But as far as I understand, it is definitely possible to convert stream the binary data on from the client side onto the so from the server side onto the client side. I do definitely remember reading some examples about that, but quite honestly, because I haven't tried it, I don't think I'm fit. So maybe David, you could answer that question.
I've never tried either. I know Anders built a mobile client at one time, and rather than encoding the binary data like a picture over and passing it, because these things can get really large when you convert it to text and then send it over into JSON packets, which are basically XML text type things, and send it over. So what he did is he sent over the text of a URL, basically, that would be stashed in an image source that would, once it got to the client, would just put the image source tag and point back to the server to let the mobile client container or the browser client pull the images from the server as needed. Because otherwise, imagine, he had this case, I think it was the fish fact demo, where it would take forever as you encoded all of these big bitmaps that were in bitmap blobs in a database and send them over to the client. If it's a browser or mobile client, let it fetch the images as needed. And something just struck me right now. I actually completely forgot. I have written a blog on how to send binary data using DataSnap servers from of course, from a DataSnap server to a DataSnap client. And what I've used was basically an Excel file, how to transfer an Excel file. I think it's somewhere on my blog. Let me fish that out and probably put it along with the link to the source code for this project, for this demo. I mean, there's many ways to do it, and Pavel's mentioning you can base 64 encode binary data and set it as a string, and then use decode 64 on the client back to the binary. And I agree. Again, I think it depends on how much data that ends up being when you encode it. If it's, imagine a 10 megapixel or 50 megapixel picture. There was some big picture of the whole universe map, for example, where maybe it was high resolution Milky Way. Some of that you don't want to send over as data, but you have choices because we're programmers. And I'll put thanks here, and we're going to watch the time, and then yep. So, what you're trying to do, how much what your high-speed bandwidth is, how much you want to send from the server to the client. Let's see.
Absolutely, David. Before I just realized, I think you can do that. If I'm just answering the question before, if the function returns a T stream, you can actually just stream the raw binary data from the DataSnap server to DataSnap client.
Yep. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe a couple more questions, Thomas. Let's see. Oh, let's go back. What application servers does this project support? Well, Todd, it's a DataSnap server, so it can run. Right now, Delphi and C++ DataSnap servers are Windows native code, so they run on Windows desktops and Windows servers in 32-bit or 64-bit in the case of Delphi. And a DataSnap server is an application server in 3 components: the DSS server, and so on. I mean, so you can check out, Todd, the Pavel Glowacki's DataSnap tutorial. He's got his Delphi Labs. Just put Delphi Labs DataSnap, and you'll find 11 lessons on how to build DataSnap servers in Delphi. Let's go. Let's see. And Thomas is saying here, you probably can see these questions in the question log too. As I understand it, this was a server-side client application. Well, it was a server DataSnap server. The HTML5 Builder client. Why don't you explain that? He said, I would think it would have been easier for this type of application to directly use PHP talking to MySQL to get the data. What was the advantage of the JSON approach? I guess solution could be pure mobile client, not require a database connection, right?
Yes. So basically, like I said, you're right. I mean, I could have, coded it straight away into, from PHP straight into MySQL. But the reason you'd want to use a DataSnap REST server is because then the REST server actually can be called from several clients, like or several different client types, like David mentioned earlier. So it's always, and of course, having a DataSnap REST server, your application just becomes much more scalable. That is number one. Number two is you want to leverage your existing Delphi skills to basically create servers that can be called by by any client. It doesn't matter whether it's PHP or Python or simply JavaScript for that matter. So there are definitely advantages of using building a DataSnap REST server versus pure PHP.